I didn't plan on ending up in Alaska. Nobody really does. I was working contract IT support back in Boise, mostly fixing point-of-sale systems for small chains and doing overnight server maintenance for companies that didn't want downtime during business hours. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep me ahead of rent and my car loan, and I didn't have to talk to people much. That changed when the contracts dried up around late October. A couple of clients folded, one got bought out and brought in their own team, and suddenly I was burning through my savings faster than I'd like to admit. By December I was down to about $1,800 and a maxed out credit card I kept pretending I'd deal with. Next month, that's when I saw the listing. Remote radar technician, seasonal contract, 3 months minimum, housing provided. Pay was better than anything I was getting locally, and the description was vague enough that it sounded easier than it probably was. I applied mostly out of habit, didn't expect a call back. They called the next morning. The interview was short. A guy named Harris asked about my experience with signal systems, basic troubleshooting, and whether I was okay working alone for long stretches. I said yes to everything. He didn't press. Just told me the site was outside a small airstrip about 40 miles from the nearest town, and that most of the job was monitoring equipment overnight and logging anomalies. He used the word anomalies, like it was normal. I didn't ask what kind. 2 days later, they sent me the contract. I signed it that night. The flight out took most of a day, then another hour in a truck that felt like it might break apart on the frozen road. The station was smaller than I expected. One main building, a generator shed, and a radar tower maybe 100 yards out, half covered in ice. No other buildings, no lights except the ones coming from the station windows. Harris met me there. Mid-50s, quiet, the kind of guy who doesn't waste words. He showed me around quickly. Control room, sleeping quarters, kitchen, backup systems. Everything was functional, nothing new. The equipment looked like it had been updated in parts over the years, but never fully replaced. Before he left, he handed me a laminated sheet, about the size of a clipboard page, printed clean, no company logo. "These are the operating rules for night shift," he said. Read them before midnight. I asked if there was anything I should be worried about. He shook his head once. "Just follow the rules exactly. You'll be fine." Then he left, just like that. The truck lights disappeared down the road, and I was alone. I waited until I'd unpacked my bag and made coffee before I read the sheet. It had 7 rules, simple formatting. No explanations. 1. Do not respond to any radio transmission that does not include a valid flight identifier. 2. If the radar displays an object below ground level, power down the main screen for exactly 60 seconds before restoring it. 3. Between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock, do not log or record any unidentified signals. 4. If you hear your name transmitted over any frequency, do not acknowledge it. 5. Do not look outside if the system reports overhead traffic but no corresponding audio is detected. 6. If an aircraft requests landing clearance without appearing in the system registry, redirect to secondary frequency and terminate the channel. 7. If more than 3 unidentified signals appear simultaneously, remain inside the control room and do not leave until they clear. I read through it twice. None of it made sense in a practical way, but I'd worked enough weird contracts to know companies sometimes had procedures that sounded stranger than they were. I figured it had something to do with signal interference or maybe military airspace nearby. Alaska has a lot of that. Still, some of it stuck with me. The one about hearing your name. That didn't sound like interference. I set the sheet next to the console and started my first shift at 10 p.m. The system was straightforward. Radar feed on the main screen, frequency panels to the right, logging software running on a separate monitor. For the first few hours, nothing happened. A couple of legitimate flights passed through the outer range, all properly tagged, all routine. I logged them, checked system status, drank too much coffee. The building made noise the way old buildings do. Pipes shifting, wind pressing against the walls, the low hum of the generator cycling outside. Around midnight I started to settle into the rhythm of check screens, note timestamps, stretch, repeat. It felt manageable, boring, even. By 1:30 am I was already thinking this might be the easiest money I'd made in a while. I remember looking at the laminated sheet again, mostly out of boredom. The rules still felt unnecessary, overly specific for a job that, so far, had been nothing but watching empty airspace. I kept it nearby anyway. No reason not to. At exactly 1:57 am, the radar flickered. Just once, I almost missed it. A brief distortion near the edge of the grid, like static. Then it cleared. I leaned forward, checked the system logs. Nothing unusual recorded. No flagged signal, no identifier. I told myself it was just interference. Weather maybe. It's Alaska. That kind of thing happens. I sat back, took a sip of coffee, and kept watching the screen. At 2:03 am, the flicker came back. This time it stayed longer. A shape appeared for maybe half a second. No tag, no altitude. Then it vanished again. I didn't log it. Not because I remembered Rule 3 right away, but because there wasn't anything solid to log. It didn't feel real enough. Still, I found myself glancing at the laminated sheet again, just to be sure. That's when I realized something I hadn't noticed before. The rules weren't written like guidelines. They were written like someone had already seen what happens if you don't follow them. And for the first time since I got there, the station didn't feel empty anymore. I didn't sleep much after that first shift, but that wasn't unusual for me. New place, different time zone, the kind of silence you only get that far out from anything. It wasn't quiet in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet where every small sound stands out too clearly. The heater kicking on, the wind scraping along the outside walls, the faint ticking from equipment cooling down in the control room. I lay in the narrow bed staring at the ceiling for a while, going over what I'd seen on the radar. It didn't add up, but it also wasn't enough to panic over. Systems glitch, signals bounce. Out here, there's probably interference from things I don't understand. That's what I told myself. Eventually, I slept for a few hours, woke up around late afternoon, and made coffee that tasted worse than it should have. The station looked different in daylight, but not in a comforting way. The snow stretched out flat in every direction, broken only by the tower and the road that led back toward wherever the truck had taken me. No movement, no bird, nothing. I walked out far enough to check the generator shed like Harris had shown me, just to have something to do. Everything seemed normal. When my shift started again that night, I felt more prepared. Not calmer, exactly, but focused. I brought the laminated sheet into the control room and set it directly next to the keyboard this time, not off to the side. If there was anything to those rules, I wasn't going to ignore them. The first few hours went the same as before. Normal flights, clean signals, nothing unexpected. I logged everything, double-checked timestamps, kept my routine steady. Around midnight, I started noticing small things that I might not have paid attention to the night before. The radar sweep wasn't perfectly consistent. Every few rotations there was a slight delay, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it. The audio panel gave off a low static hum even when no channels were active. Not loud, just enough to register if you sat still long enough. None of it broke anything. It just felt off in a way I couldn't define. At 1:48 am, a signal appeared near the outer edge of the grid. It had an identifier this time, or something that looked like one. A string of letters and numbers that didn't match any format I recognized. I leaned closer, checked the registry system. Nothing came up. The signal held steady for a few seconds, then flickered like the night before. I kept my hands off the controls. Rule 1. No. Valid identifier, no response. That part was easy. The harder part was ignoring it. The signal moved slowly across the grid, consistent speed, no altitude data. It should have been tagged automatically by the system, but it wasn't. After about 20 seconds, it disappeared without warning, no fade. Just gone. I checked the logs again. Still nothing. It was like the system didn't consider it real. I sat back and stared at the screen longer than I needed to. My first instinct was to write it down anyway, just to keep track. Then I remembered Rule 3. Between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock, do not log or record unidentified signals. It wasn't 2 o'clock yet, but it was close enough that I hesitated. I ended up not writing anything. It felt like overthinking, but I stuck with it. At 2:07 am, the radio crackled, not the usual static. This was clearer, like someone trying to tune into a frequency that wasn't quite there. I turned toward the panel without touching anything. The sound shifted, settled into something almost like a voice, but not clear enough to make out words. I checked the frequency display. It was on 121.5, the emergency channel. That made me sit up a little straighter. If someone was actually transmitting on that frequency, I was supposed to respond. That's standard, but the signal didn't come with an identifier. Just that uneven sound, like speech distorted through water. I glanced at the laminated sheet. Rule 1 again. No identifier, no response. I waited. The sound continued for maybe 10 seconds, then cut out completely. No follow-up. No repeat. Just silence. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and leaned back in my chair. It didn't feel like a near miss. It felt like I'd just passed some kind of test I didn't sign up for. I stayed alert after that, more than before. Watching the radar, listening to the channels, checking the time more often than necessary. At 2:31 am, the radar flickered again. Same as the first night, but stronger. The distortion lasted longer this time, and when it cleared, there was something on the screen that shouldn't have been there. A return signal. Center grid. No movement. No identifier. And the altitude reading was negative. I froze for a second, then leaned forward to make sure I was reading it right. It wasn't just low. It was below zero. Below ground level. I didn't need to look at the sheet to remember Rule 2. Power down the main screen for exactly 60 seconds before restoring it. I hesitated anyway. Part of me wanted to keep watching, to see if it changed, if it corrected itself. But something about the way it just sat there, unmoving, made that feel like a bad idea. I reached for the power switch and shut the main display off. The room felt different immediately. Too quiet without the screen glow. I kept my eyes on the timer in the corner of the logging monitor. 60 seconds isn't long, but it felt longer than it should have. At around the halfway point, I thought I heard something from the radio again. Not a full transmission. Just a faint shift in the static, like something trying to push through. I didn't turn toward it. I didn't touch anything. I just waited. When the timer hit 60, I powered the screen back on. The radar came up clean. No signal. No distortion. Everything back to normal. I sat there for a long time after that without moving much. Just watching. Listening. Waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The rest of the shift passed without incident. By the time the sky started to lighten outside, I almost convinced myself it had all been a system issue. A combination of glitches lining up in a way that looked worse than it was. That explanation held up until I checked the audio panel one last time before shutting things down. The emergency frequency was still selected, and for a second, just a second, I heard something come through the speaker. Clear enough this time that I couldn't pretend it was static. It wasn't a full sentence. Just one word, my name. I didn't respond. I didn't even move. I just stood there until the sound cut out on its own. Then I shut everything down, walked to the sleeping quarters, and locked the door behind me. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the equipment. A coincidence. But when I lay down and tried to sleep, I kept thinking about how the voice didn't sound distorted when it said my name. It sounded close. By the third night I had a routine, or at least something close to one. Wake up late afternoon, make coffee, check the generator. Walk the perimeter just far enough to convince myself everything was still where it should be. I kept telling myself that structure mattered out here. If I treated it like any other contract job, something normal, it would stay normal. That idea held up until I stepped back into the control room and saw the laminated sheet exactly where I'd left it. Like it was waiting. I didn't touch it right away. I went through the usual startup process first, powered up the systems, checked the connections, ran a quick diagnostic. Everything came back clean. No errors, no warnings. If there was anything wrong, it wasn't something the system recognized. I sat down, put on the headset, and started the shift at 10 p.m. The first few hours passed without anything unusual. A couple of flights passed through the outer range, all properly tagged, all moving along expected paths. I responded when needed, logged everything, kept my voice steady. It felt good to hear another human voice, even if it was just a pilot confirming altitude and heading. Around midnight, the radio went quiet again. No more legitimate traffic. Just the low hum of the equipment, and the occasional static flicker on unused frequencies. I found myself watching the clock more than the screens, waiting for something to happen even though I didn't want it to. That was the part that bothered me. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was expecting it. At 1:22 am, I noticed the first change. It wasn't on the radar. It was the audio panel. The static had shifted slightly, like a background noise changing tone. I adjusted my position in the chair, leaned closer, listening without touching the controls. The sound didn't go away. It stayed steady, just under the threshold of something you could call a voice. I checked the frequency display. Nothing active. No incoming transmission flagged. Still, the sound was there. I reached for the volume dial, then stopped. There wasn't a rule about adjusting volume, but something about interacting with it felt wrong. Instead, I sat back and waited. After about 30 seconds, the sound faded on its own. Not abruptly, just slowly thinning out until it was gone. I made a note of the time on a scrap of paper instead of the system log. I wasn't sure why. It just felt safer that way. At 1:57 am, right on schedule if I was being honest, the radar flickered again. Same distortion pattern as the previous nights. This time I didn't look surprised. I just watched it happen. When the image stabilized, there were 2 signals instead of 1. Both untagged, both moving slowly across the grid. Their paths didn't match any standard flight pattern. They weren't converging or diverging in a way that made sense. They just moved, like they were following something I couldn't see. I didn't respond. I didn't log them. I just tracked their movement with my eyes. After about a minute, one of them disappeared. The other stayed for a few seconds longer, then blinked out the same way. No fade. No transition. Just gone. I exhaled slowly and rubbed my hands together, trying to get some warmth back into them, even though the room wasn't cold. That's when I noticed something else. The time. It read 2:03 am. I hadn't seen it change from 1:59. I knew I'd been watching the screen, but I couldn't remember those minutes passing. It felt like a gap, small but noticeable. I checked the system clock again. Still 2:03. Everything lined up, but it didn't feel right. I looked down at the laminated sheet without meaning to. Rule 3. Do not log or record unidentified signals between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. I hadn't. Not officially. That thought didn't make me feel better. At 2:11 am, the radio came alive again. No static buildup this time. Just immediate sound. Breathing. That was the first thing I recognized. Slow, steady breathing, like someone holding a microphone too close. I stayed completely still, headset on, eyes on the panel. No identifier, no signal strength indicator. Just the sound. It went on for longer than I expected. 10 seconds. 20. Maybe more. Then it shifted. The breathing didn't stop, but something came under it. Words, I think. Quiet, layered, like more than one voice speaking at once, but not in sync. I couldn't make out anything specific. Just the pattern of speech. I felt my throat tighten anyway. I knew the rule. If you hear your name transmitted over any frequency, do not acknowledge it. That wasn't happening yet, but it felt close. Too close. I kept my hands away from the controls and waited it out. Eventually the sound cut off completely. No fade, no static after. Just silence. I didn't realize how tense I'd been until I shifted in the chair and felt my shoulders relax. I took the headset off for a moment, rubbed the side of my head, then put it back on. I didn't want to miss anything, even if part of me did. At 2:39 am, the radar lit up again. 3 signals this time, all untagged. All appearing at once near the center of the grid. My stomach dropped a little when I saw them. Rule 7. If more than 3 unidentified signals appear simultaneously, remain inside the control room and do not leave until they clear. It didn't say what to do with exactly 3. I stayed where I was anyway. The signals didn't move right away. They held position, almost perfectly still. That alone was wrong. Even hovering aircraft drift on radar. These didn't. After about 15 seconds, they started moving. Not in straight lines, not in arcs. They shifted position in short, uneven jumps, like the system was skipping frames. I leaned forward, trying to understand the pattern, but there wasn't one I could recognize. One of them blinked out. Then another. The last one stayed longer than the others. It moved slowly toward the center of the grid, then stopped again. I watched it until my eyes started to hurt. At some point, I realized the room had gone completely quiet. Not just the radio, the generator hum, the background noise, everything. The silence was thick enough that it felt like pressure. I swallowed and forced myself to look away from the screen for a second, just to reset. That's when I saw the window. It faced out toward the tower, a small reinforced pane set into the wall beside the console. I hadn't paid much attention to it before. No reason to. It was always dark out there. But now there was something different. The radar was still reporting overhead traffic. I could see it on the secondary display. A standard flight path, properly tagged this time. But there was no corresponding audio. No engine noise. No wind shift. Nothing. Rule 5. Do not look outside if the system reports overhead traffic but no corresponding audio is detected. I froze halfway through turning my head. I hadn't fully looked yet. Not directly. Just enough to register that something was off. I turned back to the console immediately, heart rate picking up without a clear reason. It wasn't fear exactly. More like instinct. The kind that tells you to stop before you understand why. I sat there for a while, staring at the screens, listening to nothing. Eventually the radar cleared. The signal disappeared. The room sound came back gradually, like someone turning the volume up from 0. I didn't look at the window again for the rest of the shift. When morning came, I shut everything down slower than usual, double-checking each step, making sure I wasn't missing anything. Before I left the control room, I picked up the laminated sheet and read through the rules one more time. They hadn't changed, but they didn't feel like precautions anymore. They felt like instructions for staying out of something I was already too close to. I set the sheet back down, turned off the lights, and walked to the sleeping quarters. As I closed the door behind me, I caught myself listening for something on the other side of the wall. I didn't hear anything. That didn't help. By the fourth night, the routine didn't help anymore. It still gave me something to do, something to hold on to, but it didn't make the station feel normal. If anything, it made the differences stand out more. The way the control room lights seemed slightly dimmer after midnight. The way the air felt heavier, like the building was holding something in. I started noticing gaps in my memory, small ones at first. I'd look at the clock and realize more time had passed than I remembered. 10 minutes here, 15 there. Nothing major, but enough to make me double-check the logs, even when I knew I hadn't recorded anything during those periods. I stopped writing notes on scrap paper. It didn't feel safe anymore. Like putting things into words might make them more real. I still followed the rules. Exactly. That part hadn't changed. If anything, I followed them more carefully now. I kept the laminated sheet directly in front of me during the shift, not off to the side. I didn't want to rely on memory. I didn't trust it. The shift started the same as the others. System checks, clean startup, a couple of routine flights early in the night. I handled them automatically. Voice steady, responses short and professional. Nothing in those interactions felt wrong. It was grounding in a way I didn't expect. Real people, real planes, real data. That part still worked. Around 1:10 am, the last legitimate signal cleared the grid, and the station settled into that familiar empty stretch. I leaned back in my chair, took a sip of coffee that had gone lukewarm, and tried not to think about what would happen next. It didn't take long. At 1:43 am, the audio panel clicked softly. Not a transmission. Just a physical click, like a switch toggling somewhere inside the unit. I looked over immediately. No channels were active. No incoming signal indicated. But the click had been real. I heard it clearly. I waited, watching the panel without moving. Nothing else happened. After about a minute, I turned back to the radar, telling myself it was just the equipment cycling. That explanation held for exactly 8 minutes. At 1:51 am, the radio came on without warning. No static build-up, no gradual signal. Just immediate sound. It wasn't breathing this time. It was clearer. Words, or something close to words. Still layered, still overlapping, but louder than before. I couldn't understand them, not fully, but I caught fragments. Numbers. Directions. Altitudes that didn't make sense. Negative values again. My hands stayed on my lap. I didn't touch the controls. The sound continued for maybe 15 seconds, then shifted. The tone changed, like the voices were aligning into something more focused. I felt it before I understood it. That moment right before something becomes clear. I knew what was coming. I didn't want to hear it, but I knew. I leaned back slightly, as if distance would help, even though it wouldn't. The voices narrowed into one. Clearer now. Closer. And then it said my name. Not loud, not distorted. Just direct. Like someone standing behind me and speaking at a normal volume. My chest tightened immediately. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the radar screen and focused on breathing evenly. In through my nose, out through my mouth. The way I used to when I needed to stay calm during long overnight shifts back in Boise. The voice didn't repeat itself. It didn't need to. After a few seconds, the transmission cut out completely. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that came before it. I stayed still for a long time after that, longer than I realized. When I finally looked at the clock, it read 2:12 am. Another gap. I didn't remember those minutes passing. I checked the radar. 2 signals were already on the grid, both untagged, both moving slowly. I hadn't seen them appear. That bothered me more than the voice. I watched them without logging anything. Without reacting. Just observing. They moved in a pattern I couldn't follow, crossing paths without intersecting, like they were avoiding each other intentionally. After about a minute, one disappeared. The other remained, drifting toward the center of the grid. Then the altitude reading changed. Slowly, but steadily, it dropped. 0. Then below. Negative again. I didn't hesitate this time. I reached over and powered down the main screen. The room dimmed instantly, leaving only the soft glow from the secondary monitor. I kept my eyes on the timer. 60 seconds. That was all I had to do. Wait. At around the 20-second mark, I heard something from the hallway. Not the control room. Outside it. A soft sound like a footstep on the floor. I froze, eyes still on the timer, but my attention shifted completely. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else here. I knew that. I'd been told that clearly. The sound came again, slightly closer this time. Measured. Not random. Not the building settling. Something with weight. I felt my pulse pick up, but I didn't move from the chair. Rule 7 didn't apply exactly, but the idea behind it did. Stay inside. Don't leave. I kept watching the timer. 30 seconds. 40. The footsteps stopped. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It felt occupied, like something was just outside the door, waiting. At 58 seconds, I almost turned my head toward the hallway. I wanted to see. Just a quick look. That thought came fast and sharp, stronger than it should have been. Like it wasn't entirely mine. I forced myself to keep looking forward. 60 seconds. I powered the screen back on immediately. The radar came up clean, no signal, no distortion. Everything normal again. The hallway sound didn't come back. I sat there for a while, listening carefully, but there was nothing. Eventually, I stood up and walked to the door. I didn't open it. I just stood there, hand hovering near the handle, trying to decide if checking was a good idea or a mistake. After a few seconds, I stepped back. Closed distance felt safer than open space. I returned to the chair and finished the shift without leaving the control room. Around 3:40 am. The radar picked up another signal. Just one this time. Untagged. It moved slowly across the grid, then stopped directly over the station. The system flagged it as overhead traffic. I checked the audio panel. No sound, no engine noise. Nothing. Rule 5 again. I didn't look at the window. Not even slightly. I kept my eyes on the console and waited. The signal stayed there for almost a full minute. Longer than any of the others. My hands were steady, but it took effort. I focused on breathing, on staying still, on not giving in to the urge to check outside. Eventually, the signal faded. Not instantly like the others. This one dimmed gradually, like it was moving away or losing strength. When it was gone, the room felt lighter again. Not safe. Just less heavy. The rest of the shift passed without anything major. No more voices. No more footsteps. Just the quiet hum of the station and the steady sweep of the radar. When morning came, I shut everything down and walked to the sleeping quarters without looking back at the control room. I locked the door behind me again, same as the night before. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, thinking about the footsteps in the hallway. About how they stopped right outside the door. About how I almost opened it. That part stayed with me more than anything else. Not what I heard. What I almost did. Before I lay down, I checked my phone out of habit. No signal, same as before. No messages, no updates. Just the time and the date, confirming that I was still here, still on schedule. I set it down on the table and turned off the light. As I closed my eyes, I found myself listening again, not for sounds from outside, but for anything inside the room that didn't belong. I didn't hear anything, but I didn't sleep right away either. By the fifth night, I stopped trying to explain things. Not out loud, not to myself, not even in that quiet way people do when they're alone and trying to stay rational. The explanations weren't holding anymore. Every time I found something that almost made sense, something else happened that didn't fit. So I switched focus. Follow the rules. Finish the contract. Get paid. Leave. That was the plan. Simple enough on paper. I woke up later than usual that afternoon, sometime after 5 p.m. My phone said I'd slept almost 9 hours, but it didn't feel like it. My head was heavy, like I'd been woken up too many times even if I didn't remember it. I made coffee stronger than before and forced myself through the same routine. Check the generator, walk the perimeter, come back inside before the cold started biting through the jacket. Nothing looked different outside, but I caught myself scanning the snow more carefully than before, looking for tracks that shouldn't be there. I didn't find any. That didn't help. When my shift started, I felt alert in a way that wasn't entirely natural. Not jittery, not panicked, just tuned in. Like my body already knew what time it was without needing to check the clock. The systems came online clean again. No errors, no warnings. If someone walked in and looked at the screens, they'd think it was just another quiet night in an empty sector. I sat down, put on the headset, and kept the laminated sheet directly in front of me. I didn't need to read it anymore. I knew the rules, but having it there felt necessary. Around 11:30 p.m., a routine flight passed through, something cargo, heading east. I responded, logged it. Listened to the pilot's voice crack slightly over the transmission. Normal. Grounded. That helped more than I expected. It reminded me that not everything here was wrong. Just parts of it. After midnight, the quiet settled in again. The kind that presses in from all sides. I kept my eyes moving between the radar and the audio panel, not letting myself stare at any one thing too long. That habit came naturally now. At 1:36 a.m., the first change hit earlier than usual. The radar didn't flicker this time. It dimmed. Just slightly, like the brightness dropped a few levels without any input. I checked the settings. Nothing had changed. The display stabilized after a few seconds, but the color felt off. Less contrast, harder to focus on. I leaned closer, adjusting my position instead of the screen. That's when I noticed something new. A faint trail behind the sweep line, like the radar wasn't clearing properly between rotation. Ghosting. That shouldn't happen with this system. It's digital. Clean refresh every cycle. I watched it for a full minute, confirming it wasn't my eyes playing tricks. The trail stayed consistent, not attached to any signal, just a residual smear following the sweep. It made everything harder to read. At 1:52 a.m., a signal appeared directly within that trailing area. No flicker. No warning. It was just there. Untagged, stationary, center left of the grid. I stared at it, trying to see if it matched the ghosting pattern, or if it was separate. It held steady, unaffected by the sweep. Real, or at least more real than the distortion. I didn't log it. Not yet. I checked the time, 1:53 a.m., too close to 2 o'clock. I waited. The signal didn't move. It didn't change. It just stayed there, like it was waiting for something. At 2 o'clock a.m. exactly, the system clock ticked over, and the signal blinked once. Not gone. Just acknowledged, somehow. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the system recognized it without displaying any new data. I felt a tightness in my chest, not panic, more like anticipation. The kind that builds when you know something is about to happen, but you don't know what. The radio stayed silent. That part was new. Usually there was something. Static, breathing, voices. This time, nothing. Just the hum of the equipment and the faint wind outside. At 2:08 a.m., a second signal appeared. Same as the first. Untagged, stationary. No altitude data. It showed up a few inches to the right of the first one on the screen. They didn't move toward each other. They didn't react. just existed side by side. I sat there, hands still, watching both of them. At 2:14 a.m., the audio panel clicked again. Same sound as the night before. Physical. Mechanical. I turned my head slightly toward it, careful not to move too much. The channel still showed no activity. No incoming signal flagged. But the click had been real. A few seconds later, it happened again. Click. Then silence, then a third time. Click. Each one slightly louder than the last. I felt my jaw tighten without realizing it. Something about the repetition felt intentional, like a pattern I was supposed to notice. At 2:17 a.m., the radio activated. No build-up, no static. Just immediate sound again. This time it wasn't layered voices. It was a single tone. Flat, continuous, like a test signal. It held for about 5 seconds, then broke into speech. Clearer than anything I'd heard before. Still not fully understandable, but closer. I caught fragments. Coordinates. Numbers. Repeated twice. Then silence. My eyes moved back to the radar. The two signals were still there. Unchanged. I checked the clock again. 2:19 a.m. No missing time this time. That was almost worse. Everything was happening in sequence now. No gaps to hide in. At 2:26 a.m., a third signal appeared. This one was different. It didn't show up clean. It flickered into place, stabilizing over a few seconds like the earlier nights. When it settled, it was positioned directly between the other two. 3 signals. Exactly 3. I felt that same drop in my stomach as before, but sharper this time. The rule didn't apply directly. More than 3 triggers it, not 3. But it felt close enough that I didn't consider leaving the room for even a second. I stayed seated, eyes fixed on the screen. The 3 signals remained still for longer than I expected. Maybe a full minute. Then, slowly, the middle one started to move, not across the grid. Down. The altitude reading updated this time. It started at 0, then dropped. Negative. Same as before. The other 2 didn't move. They stayed at 0 altitude, fixed in place. I reached for the power switch without hesitation and shut the main display off. The room dimmed instantly again. I focused on the timer. 60 seconds. Same as before. At around the 30-second mark, I heard the hallway sound again. This time it was clearer. Not just a step. Multiple steps. Slow. Even. Moving toward the control room door. I felt the urge to turn my head, stronger than before. It wasn't just curiosity. It was pressure. Like something was pulling my attention away from the timer. I clenched my hands together and kept my eyes forward. The steps stopped right outside the door. Same as last time. Then something new, a soft sound at the handle. Not turning. Just contact. Like fingers resting against it. I held my breath without meaning to. The timer hit 50 seconds. 55. 58. Counted the last 2 seconds in my head and powered the screen back on immediately. The radar came up clean again. No signals, no distortion. I exhaled sharply, realizing I'd been holding my breath too long. The hallway was silent again. Completely. I didn't move from the chair. Not for a long time. I kept watching the screens, waiting for something else to happen. At 3:02 a.m., the radio came on again. This time it was quiet. Controlled. A single voice. Clear enough that I could understand it. It said one thing. Requesting landing clearance. No identifier, no call sign. Just that. I felt my throat tighten immediately. Rule 6. If an aircraft requests landing clearance without appearing in the system registry, redirect to secondary frequency and terminate the channel. My hand moved toward the controls slowly, deliberately. I switched to the secondary frequency without speaking, then cut the channel completely. The silence that followed felt wrong, like I'd interrupted something mid-sentence. I waited for a response. Nothing came. The rest of the shift passed without any major events. No more signals. No more voices. Just the steady hum of the station and the occasional flicker of the radar sweep. When morning came, I shut everything down and sat there for a few seconds before standing up. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel safe. I just felt watched. Not directly. Not in a way I could point to. Just a constant awareness that something had been paying attention to everything I did. I walked to the sleeping quarters, locked the door behind me, and leaned against it for a moment. My hands were steady, my breathing was normal, but the feeling didn't go away. Before I lay down, I checked the laminated sheet again. The rules hadn't changed. Same 7 lines. Same plain formatting. But for the first time, I noticed something I hadn't before. At the very bottom of the sheet, in smaller text, almost like it had been added later, there was one more line, not numbered. Just printed there. They will try to get you to let them in. I stared at it for a long time before turning off the light. I didn't remember falling asleep, just waking up with the light already fading through the small window in the sleeping quarters. For a second I didn't know where I was, which should have been a good sign that I'd actually slept, but the feeling didn't last. The first thing I thought about wasn't the job or the radar or even the voices. It was that extra line on the laminated sheet. They will try to get you to let them in. It sat in my head heavier than anything else so far because it wasn't a rule. It didn't tell me what to do. It told me what they would do. I stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, going over everything from the last 5 nights in order, trying to see if I'd already done something wrong without realizing it. I hadn't opened the door. I hadn't responded to any voice. I hadn't looked outside when I wasn't supposed to. As far as I could tell, I was still following the rules. That thought didn't make me feel better. It made it feel like something was still waiting for me to slip. I forced myself up, went through the routine slower than before. Coffee, generator check, short walk outside. The air felt colder, sharper. I didn't go as far from the building this time. Just enough to confirm nothing obvious had changed. I kept looking back at the station while I was outside, like I expected to see something standing in one of the windows. I didn't. When I came back in, I locked the door behind me even though I knew it wouldn't matter if something actually wanted in. That was new. Locking it felt pointless, but I did it anyway. When the shift started, I noticed something immediately. The control room felt different, not visually. Everything was in the same place, same lighting, same equipment. But the air felt thicker, like there was less space in the room than there should have been. I shook it off and went through the startup process. Systems came online without issue. No errors. No warnings. The laminated sheet was exactly where I'd left it. I picked it up this time, read all 7 rules again, then looked at the bottom line. It was still there. Same small text. Same wording. I set it back down carefully and sat in the chair. The first few hours were quiet again. No early signals, no radio activity. Just routine system checks and empty airspace. I found myself listening more than watching. Every small sound stood out. The faint hum of the generator, the soft click of the equipment cycling. Even my own breathing through the headset felt louder than it should have been. Around 12:40 am, I heard something that didn't fit. A soft knock. Not from the hallway this time. From the other side of the control room door. I froze immediately, eyes on the door, waiting for it to happen again. It did 2 more knocks, even spacing. Not loud, but deliberate. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. My first instinct was to call out, ask who it was, even though I knew there was no one out there. That instinct felt wrong the moment it surfaced. I looked down at the laminated sheet without thinking. It didn't say anything about knocking. But that last line echoed in my head. They will try to get you to let them in. I stayed silent. The knocking stopped after the 3rd tap. No footsteps followed. No sound of movement. Just silence. I waited a full minute before looking away from the door. Nothing else happened. The rest of the room felt tighter after that, like the space had shrunk slightly. I focused on the radar again, trying to push it out of my head. At 1:29 am, the first signal appeared earlier than usual. Untagged, moving slowly along the outer edge of the grid. I watched it without reacting. It behaved almost normally at first. Steady speed, consistent direction. Then it changed. The movement stuttered, like the system was struggling to track it. The signal jumped forward in small increments, skipping positions instead of moving smoothly. I leaned closer, trying to see if the ghosting from the previous night was back, but the display looked clean this time. No trailing artifacts, just the signal itself behaving wrong. At 1:41 am, a second signal appeared. Same behavior, same stuttering movement. They didn't interact with each other. just moved along separate paths, both slightly off from what a real flight would look like. I kept my hands away from the controls. No logging. No response. Just watching. At 1:58 a.m., both signals stopped moving at the exact same time. That was new. They froze in place near the center of the grid. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. I felt that same tightness in my chest again, but stronger. Anticipation mixed with something else. Pressure. At 2:00 a.m., the clock ticked over, and both signals dropped in altitude simultaneously. 0 to negative in less than a second. I didn't hesitate. I powered down the main screen immediately. The room dimmed. I fixed my eyes on the timer again. 60 seconds. Same as always. At around the 10-second mark, the knocking came back. This time it was louder. 3 knocks again, same spacing, but with more force behind them. I clenched my jaw and kept my eyes on the timer. The knocks repeated. 3 more. Then again. Each set slightly louder than the last. It felt like whoever or whatever was on the other side knew exactly how long I had to wait. Like it was counting with me. At 30 seconds, the sound changed. The knocking stopped, replaced by something softer. Scraping. Like fingers dragging slowly across the surface of the door. I felt my skin tighten along my arms, a physical reaction I couldn't control. The urge to move, to get up and check, was stronger than before. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It felt like compulsion. I pressed my hands against my knees to keep them still. At 45 seconds, the radio activated. No buildup, no static. Just immediate sound, my name again. Clear. Close. Repeated twice. I shut my eyes for a second, then forced them back open, locking them on the timer. 50 seconds. 55. The voice didn't stop. It kept repeating my name, same tone, same volume, like it was trying to hold my attention. 58. 59. 60. I powered the screen back on immediately. The radar came up clean. No signals. No distortion. The knocking stopped instantly. The scraping stopped. The voice cut out. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I'd experienced so far. I sat there breathing slowly, trying to steady myself without letting it show in my movements. After a few seconds, I realized something else. The door handle was moving. Not turning fully, just shifting slightly, like pressure was being applied from the other side. I stared at it, not blinking, waiting to see if it would move again. It did. A small, controlled motion. Testing. I didn't get up. I didn't go near it. I just watched until it stopped. Eventually, the handle returned to its normal position. The rest of the shift didn't return to normal. At 2:47 a.m., the radar picked up a single signal directly overhead. Properly tagged this time. A real flight. I checked the audio panel. No sound, no engine noise. Nothing. Rule 5. I kept my eyes on the console. The signal remained for about 30 seconds, then drifted off the grid. When it was gone, the room sound came back again, like it had been muted while it was there. Around 3:30 a.m., the radio activated one last time. A single voice, calm, steady. We're cleared to land. No identifier, no registry entry. I didn't respond. I didn't touch the controls. I let the transmission run until it cut out on its own. When morning came, I shut everything down with the same slow, deliberate process as before. Nothing had physically changed in the room. The door was intact. The handle was still. No marks. No signs of anything being there. But when I stood up and walked toward it, I felt something I hadn't before. Resistance. Not physical. Just a strong, immediate sense that opening it right then would be a mistake. I stopped a few steps away, waited until that feeling faded slightly, then opened it and stepped into the hallway. It was empty. Of course it was. I checked the rest of the station anyway. Every room, every corner, nothing out of place. When I came back to the control room, I looked at the laminated sheet again before ending the shift. The rules were the same. The extra line was still there. But now it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like something I was already in the middle of. I went to the sleeping quarters, locked the door again, and sat on the edge of the bed without lying down right away. My hands were steady. My breathing was normal. But there was one thought I couldn't shake. The knocking had changed. It wasn't random anymore. It was getting closer to something that sounded like intent, and I had the feeling it wasn't going to stay on the other side of the door forever. By the seventh night, I stopped thinking of it as a job. I still went through the same motions: coffee, generator check, perimeter, startup, but it felt like routine for something else now. Like I was maintaining conditions instead of doing work. The idea of finishing the contract and leaving still existed, but it didn't feel close anymore. It felt like something I said to myself out of habit, not because I believed it. I slept less during the day, even when I tried to force it. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd wake up not long after with the same feeling, that I'd missed something, or that something had happened while I wasn't paying attention. I started keeping the control room door closed even during the day. Not locked, just closed. That felt like enough. When my shift started that night, I noticed the difference immediately. Not in the systems. Those still powered up clean, still showed no errors. The difference was in the timing. Everything felt earlier. Not by the clock, but by the way my body reacted. Like it already knew what was coming before it happened. Around 12:20 am, before anything had shown up on the radar, I caught myself glancing at the door more often than the screens. I didn't know why at first. Then I realized I was waiting for the knock. It hadn't happened yet, but I expected it. That bothered me more than the knocking itself. At 12:47 am, the audio panel clicked. Just once. I didn't look at it right away. I kept my eyes on the radar, letting the sound settle in my head first. When I did look over, nothing was active. No signal. No change in the display. Still, the click had been real. It always was. I went back to the radar. At 1:03 am, a signal appeared without any flicker or distortion. Clean. Untagged. Moving along the outer edge of the grid. It looked more stable than the ones from previous nights. Smoother movement, consistent speed. If it had a valid identifier, I might have treated it as normal. But it didn't. I watched it without logging anything. It followed a straight path for about 20 seconds, then stopped abruptly. Not a gradual slowdown, just a full stop. That was new. I leaned forward slightly, focusing on it. The altitude readout showed 0. Then, slowly, it started to drop. Not instantly like before. Gradual this time. 1 unit at a time, ticking downward into negative values. I reached for the power switch, then paused. The rule didn't say to shut down immediately. It said if the radar displays an object below ground level, power down for exactly 60 seconds. It didn't specify how long I had to wait after it went negative. That hesitation cost me a few seconds. Long enough to notice something else. The signal didn't stop at a fixed negative value. It kept dropping. Past anything that would make sense even if you assumed the system was wrong. I didn't wait any longer. I powered the screen down. The room dimmed and I locked my eyes on the timer again. 60 seconds. Same as always. At around 15 seconds I heard the hallway sound. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Close to the door. Slow, steady, like someone standing right on the other side of it. My shoulders tensed automatically, but I didn't turn my head. I didn't need to. The sound was clear enough. At 20 seconds, the breathing shifted slightly, like the person, if it was a person, leaned closer to the door. Then the voice came. Not through the radio, through the door itself. Muffled, but clear enough to recognize. My name. Same tone as before. Calm. Controlled. I felt the pull immediately, stronger than anything before. Not just the urge to respond. The urge to get up, walk to the door and open it. It didn't feel like a thought. It felt like a direction. I pressed my hands down against my knees again, harder this time, grounding myself physically. 30 seconds. The voice repeated my name closer now, like it was right up against the other side. I focused on the timer. 40 seconds. The breathing got louder. Not faster, just more present. 50 seconds. The door handle moved again. Slow, deliberate. Testing the latch. I kept my eyes forward. 55. 58. 60. I powered the screen back on. The radar came up clean again. No signal. No distortion. The breathing stopped instantly. The voice cut off. The handle went still. I exhaled slowly, not letting myself look at the door right away. I waited until my breathing was steady again before turning my head slightly. The door looked normal. No movement. No sign of anything on the other side. That didn't mean anything anymore. At 1:42 am, the radio activated. Immediate sound again. No static. A single voice. Confirm visual. I didn't respond. The phrase repeated once, then stopped. I checked the radar. No tagged signal. Nothing that matched a legitimate request. I left the channel open but stayed silent. A few seconds later, the voice came back. Confirm visual. Same tone. Same volume. I reached over and cut the channel without switching frequencies. It felt like the safer option. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt like something had been cut off mid-action. At 2:05 am, two signals appeared simultaneously, both untagged, both positioned near the center of the grid. They didn't move right away, just held position. I watched them carefully, waiting for the pattern to repeat. After about 30 seconds, they started moving, not in lines, not in arcs. They shifted position in short, uneven jumps, similar to previous nights but more controlled, less random, like they were following something I couldn't see. Then a third signal appeared. Same behavior. 3 total. I stayed seated, hands still. Rule 7 didn't trigger yet, but I treated it like it had. The 3 signals moved in a loose pattern around the center, then slowly began to converge. Not directly toward each other, but closer over time. The movement took longer than before. More deliberate. I watched until they were within a small cluster on the screen. Then, without warning, all 3 dropped in altitude at once. 0 to negative in less than a second. I powered the screen down immediately. Timer. 60 seconds. At 10 seconds, the knocking started again. Louder than before. Faster. Not the same even spacing. More urgent. At 20 seconds, the knocking turned into pounding. The door shook slightly with each impact. I could feel it through the floor. 30 seconds. The voice joined it. Not just one voice this time. Multiple. Overlapping. All saying my name. Different tones, different pitches, but synced in rhythm. 40 seconds. The handle twisted harder, actually trying to turn now. I heard the latch strain slightly. My chest tightened, but I didn't move. 50 seconds. The pounding stopped suddenly. Complete silence for a split second. Then a single knock. Soft. Controlled. Like the first night. 55. 58. 60. I powered the screen back on. The radar came up clean, no signals. No distortion. The door was still. The silence returned to normal. I sat there for a long time, longer than usual, letting everything settle. My hands were steady, but it took effort. I didn't trust myself to stand up yet. Around 3:18 am, the radar picked up a tagged signal directly overhead. Legitimate flight. I checked the audio panel, no sound. Rule 5. I kept my eyes on the console. The signal remained longer than any previous overhead. Almost 2 minutes. The room felt muted the entire time. When it finally cleared, the sound returned slowly, like it had been held back. The rest of the shift passed without major events. No more signals. No more voices. Just the steady hum of the station. When morning came, I shut everything down and stayed seated for a few seconds before standing. I didn't go to the door right away. I waited until that pressure, the sense that something was waiting on the other side, faded enough to move. When I finally opened it, the hallway was empty again. Same as always. I checked the rest of the station out of habit. Nothing out of place. No signs of damage to the door. No marks. Nothing physical to match what I'd heard. When I came back to the control room, I looked at the laminated sheet one more time. The rules hadn't changed. The extra line was still there, but now it felt incomplete. Like there should have been more. Like something was missing from it. I didn't know what. I just knew the rules weren't keeping things out anymore. They were just delaying something. I went to the sleeping quarters, locked the door, and sat on the bed without lying down. My body felt steady, controlled, but my mind kept circling the same thought. The voice at the door hadn't sounded like it was trying anymore. It sounded like it expected me to open it eventually. By the 8th night, I stopped checking my phone entirely. It still had no signal, still showed the same time and date, but it didn't feel connected to anything real anymore. The station had its own rhythm, its own schedule, and whatever was happening here didn't care about anything outside of it. I kept the phone in my bag and didn't take it out again. My routine tightened even more. Shorter time outside, quicker checks, straight back in before dark fully settled. The sky that evening looked flatter than usual, like the light didn't spread the way it should. I didn't stay out long enough to think about it. When I stepped back into the station, I closed the door and locked it without hesitation. That part wasn't even a decision anymore. It was automatic. Inside, the control room felt smaller again. Not physically, but in the way sound carried. Everything felt closer. The hum of the equipment, the slight buzz in the overhead lights, even the soft shift of my own clothes when I moved. I went through the startup process carefully, slower than usual, checking each system twice, even though I knew they'd come online clean. They always did. The laminated sheet was still on the desk, exactly where I'd left it. I didn't pick it up this time. I didn't need to. The rules were already in my head, fixed there like something I couldn't forget even if I wanted to. The extra line sat there too, constant in the background. They will try to get you to let them in. I sat down, put on the headset, and started the shift. The first hour passed without anything unusual. No early signals, no radio activity. Just empty airspace and the steady rotation of the radar sweep. I kept my posture straight, my hands resting lightly on the desk, not touching anything unless I needed to. It felt like the right way to sit now, like movement mattered more than it should. Around 11:58 p.m., just before midnight, the audio panel clicked once. I didn't react immediately. I let the sound settle, then glanced over. No channels active. No signal flag. That part hadn't changed. I went back to the radar. At 12:14 am, a signal appeared near the lower edge of the grid. Untagged. Stationary. That was new. Most of them moved at least a little when they first showed up. This one didn't. It just sat there, perfectly still, like it had always been part of the display. I watched it for a full minute. No change, no altitude data. Nothing. At 12:21 am, a second signal appeared directly above the first one, aligned vertically on the screen. Same behavior. Untagged. Stationary. I felt my breathing slow without meaning to, like my body was trying to stay as controlled as possible. I didn't reach for the controls. I didn't log anything. I just watched. At 12:27 am, a third signal appeared, completing a straight vertical line on the grid. 3 total. All still. All untagged. I didn't need to look at the rules to know what this meant, even if it didn't trigger Rule 7 exactly. It felt close enough. I stayed seated, eyes fixed on the screen. The 3 signals didn't move for longer than any previous set. Nearly 2 minutes. Then, slowly, the top one began to drift downward. Not a jump, not a stutter. Smooth movement. Controlled. It moved toward the middle signal, stopped just short of overlapping it. Then held position again. A few seconds later, the bottom signal moved upward in the same way, stopping just below the middle one. The 3 were now evenly spaced, closer together than before. I felt a pressure build in my chest, not panic, something more focused. Like anticipation tightening into something sharper. At 12:34 am, all 3 signals dropped in altitude at the same time. 0 to negative instantly. I powered down the screen without hesitation. Timer. 60 seconds. At 5 seconds, the knocking started. Not from the hallway. From the inside of the control room. I froze immediately, eyes still on the timer. The sound came from behind me, somewhere near the back wall. 3 knocks. Same pattern. Same spacing. My body reacted before my mind caught up, a sharp tension running through my shoulders. I didn't turn around. I didn't move. The knocks came again. 3 more. Same spot. Same rhythm. 10 seconds. 15. The knocking shifted slightly, moving along the wall, closer to the door. I could track it by sound alone. 20 seconds. It reached the door and stopped. Silence for a moment. Then the handle moved. From the inside this time. A slow, deliberate motion, like something was testing it from my side of the door. I gripped the edge of the desk with my fingers, keeping myself grounded. 30 seconds. The radio activated. No build-up. No static. My name again. Clear. Close. But this time it didn't sound like it was coming from the headset. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere in the room. I kept my eyes on the timer. 40 seconds. The voice repeated my name, slightly different tone each time. Not distorted. Just off. Like multiple versions of the same voice layered too closely together. 50 seconds. The door handle turned further, almost fully this time. I heard the latch shift slightly. My breath caught, but I forced it back to steady. 55. 58. 60. I powered the screen back on. The radar came up clean, no signals. No distortion. The knocking stopped instantly. The voice cut off. The handle snapped back into place. The room went still, completely still. I stayed facing forward for a long time, not trusting myself to turn around yet. When I finally did, slowly, the room looked exactly the same. Nothing out of place. No signs of anything behind me. That didn't matter anymore. At 1:19 a.m., the radio activated again. A single voice. Calm. Controlled. Requesting confirmation. No identifier. No registry match. I didn't respond. The phrase repeated once, then stopped. I cut the channel without switching frequencies. Silence returned, but it didn't feel empty. At 1:46 a.m., the radar picked up a tagged signal moving through the outer range. A real flight. I watched it closely, waiting for something to be off. Everything looked normal. Path, speed, altitude. I checked the audio panel. This time there was sound. Faint, but real. Engine noise, distant but consistent. I felt a slight release of tension, the first in a while. Something real, something that behaved the way it should. Then, without warning, the sound cut out. The radar still showed the flight, still moving normally, but the audio dropped to complete silence. Rule 5. I kept my eyes on the console, forcing myself not to look toward the window. The signal continued across the grid, steady and unchanged, then exited range. When it was gone, the sound returned again, gradual, like the system was fading it back in. That moment stuck with me more than the earlier events, because it had started normal. It had proven that normal still existed here. And then it had shifted anyway. Around 2:22 a.m., the radar remained clear, no signals. No distortion. The quiet stretched longer than usual. I found myself checking the time more often, waiting for something that didn't come. That felt wrong in its own way, like the absence of activity was part of the pattern now. At 2:47 a.m., the radio activated one last time. A single voice. Very clear. We're already inside. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I just sat there listening to the silence that followed. The rest of the shift passed without anything else happening. No signals. No knocks. No voices. Just the steady hum of the station. When morning came, I shut everything down the same way as before. Slow, deliberate, checking each step. I didn't look at the door right away. I didn't want to see it move. When I finally stood up and walked toward it, everything felt normal again. The handle was still. The hallway beyond was empty when I opened it. Same as always. I checked the rest of the station, more out of habit than expectation. Nothing out of place. No signs of anything being there. When I returned to the control room, I looked at the laminated sheet one more time. The rules hadn't changed. The extra line was still there. But now it felt different. Not like a warning. Not like a possibility. Like something that had already happened. I went to the sleeping quarters, locked the door, and sat on the bed without lying down. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. But there was one thought I couldn't push away. The knocking hadn't just moved closer. It had moved inside, and whatever had said it was already inside didn't sound like it was asking for permission anymore. By the 9th night, I stopped pretending I was in control of anything. The routines were still there, the rules still in place, but it didn't feel like I was maintaining the situation anymore. It felt like I was being allowed to stay in it, as long as I kept following instructions. That distinction mattered. I woke up before my alarm that day, if you could call it that. The station clock had become the only one that felt accurate. My phone stayed in my bag, untouched. I didn't want to see anything that might contradict what was happening here. I moved through the day slower than usual, not because I was tired, but because I didn't see the point in rushing toward the next shift. Still, I did everything the same way. Coffee. Generator check. A short walk outside, even though I didn't want to. The snow looked undisturbed again, but I didn't trust that anymore. It could have changed and changed back. That thought came to me naturally now, without resistance. When I went back inside, I closed the door and locked it, then stood there for a second longer than usual, listening. Nothing. No breathing. No movement. Just silence. That didn't mean it was empty. It just meant it wasn't making noise. When I entered the control room, the first thing I noticed was the laminated sheet. It wasn't where I'd left it. It had been centered on the desk at the end of the last shift. Now it was slightly off to the right, angled just enough that it looked like someone had picked it up and set it down again without aligning it. I stopped a few steps inside the room and stared at it. I tried to remember exactly how I'd left it, but that wasn't the point. I knew I hadn't moved it. I walked over slowly and picked it up. The rules were still the same, all 7 lines, unchanged. The extra line at the bottom was still there. They will try to get you to let them in. But now there was something else. Another line beneath it. Same small text. Same formatting. They don't need permission anymore. I read it twice, then set the sheet back down exactly in the center of the desk, aligning it carefully this time. My hands were steady. That was the part that stood out to me. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't panicking, I just felt certain. Not about what was happening, but about what came next. I sat down, put on the headset, and started the shift. The systems came online as usual, no errors, no warnings. The radar sweep started clean. The audio panel stayed quiet. For the first hour, nothing happened. No signals. No clicks. No radio activity. Just the steady hum of the station. It felt wrong. Not calm, not safe, just wrong. Like something was waiting for the right moment, instead of following the pattern I'd gotten used to. At 11:52 p.m., the audio panel activated without any preceding click. Immediate sound. No static. Just a voice. Clear. Close. My name. Once. Then silence. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I just listened. Nothing followed. I checked the radar. Still clear, no signals. I kept my hands off the controls and waited. At 12:07 a.m., the radar flickered once. First time in a few nights. The distortion lasted longer than before, stretching across the grid like the system was trying to load something it couldn't process. When it cleared, there was a signal. Just one. Center of the grid. Untagged. Stationary. I watched it, expecting it to behave like the others. It didn't move. It didn't change. It just stayed there, fixed in place. At 12:14 a.m., the altitude reading appeared. 0. Then, slowly, it started to drop. I didn't wait. I powered down the screen immediately. Timer. 60 seconds. At 5 seconds, I heard something behind me. Not knocking. Not footsteps. A shift in the air, like something moving into the room. I kept my eyes on the timer. 10 seconds. The sound came again, closer this time. A soft scrape against the floor. 15 seconds. The radio activated. Not through the headset. Through the room. My name again. This time from 2 different directions at once. One near the door. One behind me. 20 seconds. I felt the pressure build stronger than ever before. Not just an urge to turn around. A certainty that I needed to. That something important was there. I clenched my jaw and kept my eyes forward. 30 seconds. The sounds moved. The one behind me shifted to my left. The one near the door moved closer to the desk. I could track them without looking. 40 seconds. The voice changed. Not my name this time. Words. Clear enough to understand. We're here. 50 seconds. The door handle turned slowly on its own. Not from the outside. Not from the inside. Just movement without contact. The latch clicked softly. 55. The pressure in my chest felt like it might break something if I didn't move. 58. 59. 60. I powered the screen back on. The radar came up clean. No signal. No distortion. The sounds stopped instantly. The voices cut off. The door handle returned to its normal position. The room went still again. I sat there breathing slowly, forcing everything back into control. It took longer this time. When I finally moved, it was deliberate. Small adjustments. Hands resting back on the desk. Eyes scanning the room without turning my head too far. Nothing looked different. Nothing looked wrong. That didn't mean anything anymore. At 12:48 am, the radio activated again. A single voice. Calm. Controlled. Requesting landing clearance. No identifier. No registry match. I didn't respond. I reached over and cut the channel immediately. Silence returned, but it felt thinner now, like it wasn't holding as much back. At 1:16 am, the radar picked up a tagged signal moving through the outer range. A real flight. I watched it closely, waiting for the shift. It came sooner than I expected. The signal stayed stable, but the altitude reading started to fluctuate slightly. Not enough to be realistic. Just small jumps up and down, inconsistent with actual flight behavior. I checked the audio panel. There was sound at first. Faint engine noise, then it cut out abruptly. Rule 5. I kept my eyes on the console. The signal continued across the grid, steady in position but wrong in detail. When it exited range, the sound returned again, but distorted this time. Warped slightly, like it had been stretched. That was new. At 1:59 am, the radar went completely blank. No sweep. No grid. Just a dark screen. I didn't touch anything. I knew better by now. The system hadn't shut down. The other monitors were still active. The timer still running. Only the radar display was gone. At 2 am exactly, the screen came back on its own. Full display. Full grid. And signals. More than I'd seen before. Not 3. Not even close. At least 6, maybe more, clustered near the center. All untagged, all moving. Not randomly. Not in patterns I could follow. Just constant motion, overlapping paths, crossing each other without collision. I felt my chest tighten again, but I didn't move. I didn't reach for the power switch. Rule 7. More than 3 unidentified signals. Remain inside the control room. Do not leave until they clear. I stayed seated, hands still, eyes fixed on the screen. The signals didn't stop. They didn't slow. They just kept moving, faster now, more erratic. Then, one by one, they started to drop in altitude. Not all at once. Sequentially. Each one hitting 0, then going negative. The process took longer than before, stretching out the moment. I didn't power down the screen. The rule didn't say to. I just watched. When the last one went negative, the entire display flickered once, then cleared. No signal. No distortion. Just empty airspace again. The silence that followed felt different. Not heavy. Not pressured. Just open. Like something had been removed instead of added. At 2:37 am, the radio activated one last time. A single voice, very clear. You didn't stop us. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I just sat there, listening to the silence that followed. The rest of the shift passed without anything else happening. No signals, no sounds. Just the steady hum of the station. When morning came, I shut everything down the same way as always. Slow. Careful. Precise. I stood up and looked at the door before moving toward it. It didn't feel the same anymore. Not like a barrier. Just something in the room. When I opened it, the hallway was empty. Same as always. I checked the rest of the station anyway. Every room. Every corner. Nothing out of place. But when I came back to the control room, I didn't look at the laminated sheet right away. I already knew it would be different. When I finally did, there was one more line added at the bottom. Same small text, same formatting. You're part of it now. I didn't touch the sheet. I just stood there for a moment, then turned off the lights and walked to the sleeping quarters. I didn't lock the door this time. It didn't feel like it mattered anymore. As I lay down, staring at the ceiling, I realized something I hadn't let myself think about until then. The rules weren't protecting me anymore. They were making sure I stayed exactly where I was supposed to be. I didn't sleep before the 10th night. I lay on the bed in the sleeping quarters with the light off, staring at the ceiling, but I wasn't trying to rest. The idea of sleep felt unnecessary now, like something from before I understood what this place actually was. Time still moved, at least according to the station clock, but it didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. I got up before the shift without checking anything, not even the time. I didn't make coffee. I didn't go outside. The routine didn't matter now. It had served its purpose. Whatever came next wasn't something I could prepare for with small, normal action. I walked straight to the control room and stepped inside without hesitation. The door was already slightly open. I knew I hadn't left it that way. I didn't stop to think about it. I pushed it the rest of the way and entered. The room felt different immediately. Not heavier like before. Not smaller. Just settled. Like everything inside it had reached a final state. The equipment was already on. All of it. The radar sweep moving across the grid. The audio panel active, the timer running. I hadn't powered anything up. I stood there for a few seconds, taking it in. Then walked to the desk and sat down. The laminated sheet was gone. Not moved. Not shifted. Gone completely. In its place was a blank section of the desk, like nothing had ever been there. I didn't look for it. I didn't need to. I already knew the rules. And I knew they weren't rules anymore. They were just steps I'd already followed. The headset was resting where I always left it. I put it on. Even though I wasn't sure it mattered. The moment it settled over my ears, the radio came alive. No build-up. No static. Just a voice. Not calling my name this time. Not giving instruction. Just speaking calm and steady. Maintain position. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My hands rested on the desk, fingers still, eyes on the radar. The screen was full. Not cluttered, not distorted, but active. Signals moved across it in steady paths, some tagged, some not. They didn't behave like the ones from earlier nights. They didn't flicker or stutter. They were consistent, stable, integrated into the system like they had always been there. I watched them without trying to separate what was real from what wasn't. That distinction didn't seem important anymore. Around what I assumed was midnight, though I hadn't checked the clock, the first request came through. A voice over the radio. Clear. Controlled. Requesting landing clearance. No identifier. No registry match. Same as before. But this time I didn't reach for the switch. I didn't cut the channel. I just listened. The voice repeated the request once, then waited. I felt the pause more than I heard it. The expectation behind it. I looked at the radar. One of the untagged signals had moved closer to the center of the grid. Its path was steady, deliberate. I knew what I was supposed to do, not because of the rule, because it felt like the next step in something that had already been set in motion. I leaned forward slightly and spoke into the microphone. My voice came out steady, even, cleared to land. The words didn't feel strange. They didn't feel wrong. They just felt like something I'd been preparing to say. The signal on the radar continued its path, then slowed, then stopped. The altitude reading dropped to 0, then below. Negative. I didn't power down the screen. I didn't look away. I just watched as the signal held there for a moment, then faded out gradually, not disappearing all at once, but dissolving into the background of the display. The radio went silent again, not empty, just quiet. A few seconds later, another voice came through. Different tone. Same structure. Requesting landing clearance. I didn't hesitate this time. Cleared to land. The process repeated. The signal moved, stopped, dropped below 0, then faded. Each time it happened, the room felt more stable, more complete. Like something was being finalized. I lost track of how many requests came through. 5, maybe 6. Each one handled the same way, no resistance. No hesitation. Just the same response, over and over. Cleared to land. At some point I realized the tagged signals were gone. The real flights. The ones that had grounded everything before. The radar still showed movement, but none of it matched anything I could recognize as normal traffic. That didn't bother me. It just felt like the system had adjusted to a different kind of operation. Around what I assumed was 2 o'clock a.m. Though I still hadn't checked the clock, the radio activated again. This time it wasn't a request. It was a statement. Final approach. The voice sounded closer than before. Not physically closer, but more direct. I looked at the radar. A single signal, centered, moving straight toward the station. Not across the grid. Toward me. The path was a straight line from the outer edge to the exact center. No deviation. No adjustment. I watched it approach without moving. My hands stayed on the desk. My breathing stayed even. When it reached the center, the altitude reading appeared. 0. Then it began to drop. Slowly. More slowly than any previous signal. one unit at a time, descending into negative values. I felt something shift in the room as it did. Not pressure, not sound, just a change. Like the space around me was adjusting to accommodate something new. The radio came on again. Same voice. Confirm arrival. I didn't think about the rules. I didn't think about the previous nights. I just responded. Confirmed. The signal reached a point on the display where the numbers stopped updating. Not because it had stabilized, but because there was nowhere else for it to go. It held there for a moment, then didn't fade. It stayed, fixed in place, integrated into the grid like it belonged there. The room went completely still. The hum of the equipment dropped slightly, not shutting off, just lowering in pitch. The lights dimmed a fraction. I sat there, looking at the screen, waiting for the next step. Nothing came. No new signals. No new voices. Just the steady presence of that one point on the radar. After a while, I leaned back in the chair. The first time I'd done that all night. My body felt steady. Not tense, not tired. Just settled, like the room had been earlier. I looked around slowly, taking in the control room. The door was closed. The handle still. The walls unchanged. Everything looked exactly the same as it had on the first night. The difference was in how it felt. There was no sense of something outside anymore. No pressure from the hallway. No awareness of anything trying to get in. That part was gone. Completely. I looked back at the radar. The signal was still there, fixed at the center. Not moving. Not fading. Just present. The radio activated one last time. A voice I hadn't heard before. Not one of the layered ones, not one that sounded like me. Something else. Calm. Final. Maintain position. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I understood. I stayed in the chair, hands resting on the desk, eyes on the screen. Time passed, though I couldn't say how much. The clock was still there, still running, but I didn't look at it. It didn't feel relevant anymore. At some point, the idea of ending the shift crossed my mind. Shutting down the systems. Walking out of the control room. Leaving the station. It felt distant. Not impossible. Just unnecessary. Like a step that didn't belong in the sequence anymore. I stayed where I was. The radar continued its steady sweep, passing over the fixed signal again and again without changing it. The room stayed quiet. Stable. Complete. I don't know how long I've been sitting here now. The shift never ended. The systems never shut down. The radio doesn't ask for anything anymore. It doesn't need to. Sometimes I think about the first night, about how I read the rules like they were something meant to protect me. That part almost feels distant now, like something that happened to someone else. The sheet is gone, but I don't need it. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what this place is now. And every once in a while, when the radar sweep passes over the center point, I notice something I didn't at first. The signal doesn't stay exactly the same. It shifts slightly. Not in position, in shape. Just enough to suggest it isn't just a marker on a screen. Just enough to feel like something is still arriving.